Welcome back to Torah on the Go. Whether you are working out, walking the dog, taking a break from work, we really appreciate that you have decided to spend some time studying Torah with me and Rabbi Feinstein.
Welcome.
So, 3 weeks of buildup, we're finally going to begin the story of Exodus. And here we go. Verse 8.
Pass the matzah, would you please?
That's right. Verse 8 of chapter 1 of the book of Exodus reads, Vayakam melech chadash, and a new king arose, al Mitzrayim, over Egypt, asher lo yada et Yosef, that did not know or did not want to know Joseph. We'll talk about this.
Right.
What does it mean, and what does it mean that our antagonist, that our villain, is introduced before our hero? The stage is set by the Torah in a very interesting way, both from a spiritual sense, from a political sense, and from a narrative, from a literary sense, that we are introduced in this way to the beginning of the Exodus story.
As we talked about last week, this is the turning of history. And unfortunately, I guess it's the truth that our history, our long history of wandering in the world has turned on these moments of turning. It was the moment of turning when the people of Germany turned on us. After all that we had contributed to German society, German culture, and German power. It's the moment that Eastern Europe turned. The Tsar turned on us after we had lived there for so many hundreds of years. It's the moment that Spain and Iberia turned on us. This is that turning moment. The Torah wants us to focus on the turning moments because these are the moments that give us that instinct of watching out. You are an Ivri, according to the Torah. Ivri is a passer through. You're never going to be fully at home any place in the world except your own home.
So here, the commentators jump in right away to explain Lo Yadad Yosef, right? That this new Pharaoh didn't know Joseph and the Jewish contributions to Egyptian society.
He wakes up with a bunch of Jews on his front lawn, wants to know how the heck they got there.
That's exactly right. Has no conception of that how we got there, how Joseph had saved, how Joseph had saved Egypt.
Right.
So the commentators immediately come along and say, it's not that he didn't know, it's that he didn't want to know. He didn't want to recognize.
Right.
He didn't want to recognize the history of what had happened. We live today in a world where history is becoming like a interpretive dance, right? Everyone can look at history and suddenly just make up narrative about what had happened, interpret it the way that they want, that's convenient for you. This almost feels like, in so many ways, Exodus feels very modern, very current. It teaches us an important lesson about what it means to recognize the past and the danger of somebody arising to power who has no grasp of what has occurred before.
Right, how we got there and what we contributed to the society. The Jews have always had a political theory. And the political theory is if we're good citizens, if we obey the law, if we contribute to the society around us, if we assimilate as much as we can without losing our distinctiveness, but show loyalty to that culture, they will accept us and allow us to stay. And over and again, I hate to sound like I don't mean to sound like a Fabrent Zionist in this sense, but that's the history. Over and again, you find the same story. And the truth is that Joseph saved Egypt.
Right.
He saved Egypt and saved the world from starvation. Lo Yadad Yosef, he didn't want to know it because he had political motives. He needed to unite his people. And the history, you know this because you're a scholar of Torah, scholar of Bible. There was a people that had conquered Egypt called the Hittites. They were from Asia Minor. Joseph was the premier under one of the Hittite kings. The native Egyptians came back, expels the Hittites. So it was convenient not to know Joseph because he served the enemy.
Right.
But more than that, what this Pharaoh needs to do is to unite his people. And the easiest way to unite a people is to ignite fear of the other. And if you can find an other who doesn't have the capacity to fight back, that's even better. Fear of the other is the best way to unite a people in a sort of crusade of national identity. because Egypt was itself a nation made up of many, many different tribes and different kinds of cultures and different religious convictions. And now you unite them all into one story of not who we are, but who we're not.
Right. And in that historical context, there was a people who was the other that ended up leaving Egypt, that they were referred to as the Irbus in the cuneiform tablets. And so were we to try to contextualize, which is, this entire Exodus narrative and set it in history, which is what National Geographic devotes itself to doing the month before Passover and Easter, to show you that this all actually occurred exactly as spoken. Many scholars believe it might have occurred in that context that you referenced, the Hittites being thrown out, the Irbus being enslaved or rebelling and leaving and going into the wilderness. And Irbu and Ivri obviously resemble each other a great deal.
Right.
Now, let's play the chicken and egg game here. Let's address the second question I presented. Pharaoh is introduced first. Is Moses born to rise up against Pharaoh, or could it be that Moses would have been Moses regardless? Moses would have been a Jewish leader, but maybe he just would have been president of the shoal in Ramses.
He'd be smarter than that,
right? Maybe he just would have been, he would have contributed to the synagogue, the JCC at Pithom and Ramses. He wouldn't have been Moses, the great leader that led us out of Egypt. Great Jewish leaders arise in specific moments. In the great chicken and egg debate of Exodus, it's which one of these people, demanded the presence of the other.
Well, I want to make one comment before we answer that question,
Sure.
if it's okay. And that is, the name of the book is Shemot, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, is about identity.
Yeah.
And begins with the list of the names of Joseph's sons who came into Egypt. In that verse that you read us, the king of Egypt doesn't have a name.
No.
He's not even known as Pharaoh, which is his throne title. Correct. Later we'll find out that his name is Ramses. He doesn't have a name. He's just Melech Mitzrayim. And I think that is a very subtle, but I think an important note to say that he's going to have a role in this story, but his role in this story is going to be compromised. There are going to be several others who are more important than him. Joseph's name is mentioned in this.
Correct.
And in a few moments, we're going to read the story of the midwives. They're named in the story.
Right.
He's still not named in the story.
Right.
He's not named till way into the story. That's the Bible's insult. When your grandmother talked about someone who deserved it, she'd say, Yimach Shmo, let his name be erased. And that's really what the Bible's trying to do here.
Right. This is the story not so much about an individual pharaoh.
Yeah.
This is a story about pharaohs.
It's more than that. He's Melech Mitzrayim. He's supposed to be the most powerful king in the world, and yet he is ruled by fear.
Right.
He is ruled by the fear of this people that he doesn't understand, can't accept, resents having them there. And a man who is ruled by fear loses his individuality. He loses his identity.
And that is juxtaposed against Moses, who's named
right away.
We know. So we leave Joseph, who's named right away. We meet Shifra and Puah, the two midwives that we'll talk about next week or the following, that are named right away as heroes. And then Moses is named right away as a hero. And so we have a lineage of heroes kind of interwoven, a thread that's interwoven with this other narrative going on in the palace of these kind of nameless people in the shadows, like these faceless, nameless figures that we have to oppose.
So the question you asked is one of the classic questions of history, of historiography, is do the times make the leader, or does the leader make the times? And it's a classic argument within history. I think that the best answer I heard is this idea that the times present opportunities, but heroes have to rise to those opportunities. Had Churchill not been Churchill,
right,
the times would have crushed him, right? But had Roosevelt not been Roosevelt, had the circumstances of history presented themselves, But the hero didn't have the internal qualities of strength, courage, magnetism, wisdom, vision in order to overcome the adversity and see a way through the adversity and to push the community, push the world through the adversity, then the hero would never have become a hero. And I think here the Moses character is exactly that. You have this moment and God calls this fellow and says, I need you to go and do this. He doesn't want to go. Frankly, his not wanting to go, his reluctance is one of the most endearing parts of him, because who wants that? I mean, who really wants to step up? But once he steps up, he finds himself. He finds his voice. Right? He starts out by saying to God, Lo ish dvarim anochi. That's right. I got nothing to say. And it's not a speech impediment. It's deeper than that. I'm not a man of the public. He talks to sheep, He leads sheep. I'm not a person with anything much to say to the world, and yet Moses finds words. That's what another narrative that goes on here. Pharaoh is ruled by fear. Moses develops into the leader he is because of his inspiration and because of his deep sense of responsibility to this people.
I often say in front of the synagogue, parents aspire that their kids be doctors, lawyers, bankers. Mm-hmm. The Bible clearly sets out the profession that we're supposed to be. Mm-hmm. That's shepherds. So if you want to raise good Jewish kids and you want to pick a carear path for them.
It's organic.
That's right. There's a shepherd school somewhere. I don't know where. I've still not found one, but when I do, I'll make sure to publicize it to the entire community. To me, this is one of the great iconic introductions. In so many great stories, we meet the antagonist before we meet the protagonist. Mm. And this one does a great job at digging into the qualities that make an antagonist rather than the antagonist himself from the very beginning.
Right. That's why that's why the name's not mentioned.
That's right. So it's almost like we see, a camera angle of the guy walking down the street grabbing the ice cream cone from a baby, and we don't see the face. The face is not important yet. The face is not important. We know that there is this dark force in power who's become the new king of Egypt. It's not important for us to know exactly who it is, because the truth is that this is a story that could happen anywhere at any time. Yeah. This is a timeless narrative, one that we're going to repeat again and again and again, not only on the holiday of Passover, but to learn who we are as a people.
So let's take a moment. I think this is a bit of a digression, but I think you'll appreciate it, of course. The Bible never tells us what anybody looks like.
Right.
It may be a clue. David was ruddy, it said, is red. But it doesn't tell us the physiognomy of a character. And as a movie maker, you understand that the choice of a character, the choice of an actor or an actress, tells me a lot about the inner life of the character. Right? So the most famous rendition of this in cinema, of course, is Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments.
Right.
And he makes the choice. He casts Yul Brynner as the Pharaoh.
Can you imagine any other Pharaoh besides Yul Brynner?
But that's the point. I want to just take a moment and meditate on this, because especially given what you just said. Right? First of all, it's impossible to see Yul Brynner without thinking the King of an Eye. Right? Even when he was in the Magnificent Seven, riding around the American West, he was still the King of Siam.
Right. And I thought he was Pharaoh riding on a horse. But okay, I'll take the King of Siam. But My Fair Lady. Yeah.
But Yul Brynner. Apparently, by the way, the actor, was a very, very fine human being. He was
supposed to be a lovely person.
Yeah.
That was the irony of him.
Right.
Yeah. Lovely, lovely person.
Right. But the character, this is huge man, shaved head, big chest. The man never owns an undershirt, right? All you see is that magnificent body and that scowl on his face. That's a quality of evil. It's a certain kind of in-your-face evil. Right? The question here is, Vayakom Melech Hadash, you have a new king of Egypt who's afraid of Jews.
Right.
Maybe that's not that kind of evil.
Right.
Maybe you could cast him differently. Maybe he's a small man pretending to be big.
Right. So it was Paul Giamatti or even Danny DeVito. Right? You're talking about somebody...
Jack Nicholson.
Right, who's not physically impressive.
Right.
Who is anxious and nervous and intimidated by others.
Right. And then you get a very different sense of the struggle here.
Right.
His struggle is he's trying to be a leader, and he doesn't know how, and he doesn't trust his own personal magnetism. He's not comfortable in his own skin. He's not comfortable in his own power.
Right.
That's the source of his hatred for the people of Israel, and it's going to be his source of hatred for Moses.
Right.
Because Moses in no way is comfortable in his own skin, and yet he's completely comfortable in the role.
Right.
As the story goes forward, Moses is completely comfortable in the role of controlling history.
And we have reason to believe Moses was big and strong. Moses kills somebody with one punch.
Yes.
So we'll talk about all this as it goes on, but it's fascinating that this kind of faceless, nameless king of Egypt, right? I've never thought of him as Danny DeVito before, and it works both ways. I mean, I think that it would make people laugh if we talk about Pharaoh as Danny DeVito. Danny DeVito being in a villain or being a hero, it's just funny. That's just part of the way our society thinks, right? There's a great movie that he's in called Other People's Money, okay? Where he's like the most successful mergers and acquisition investment banker, and he's constantly telling people that he's hungry and he wants donuts, and he goes into these very high-powered meetings. And Danny DeVito, we don't think of heroes or antagonists that look like that, and that's part of, I think, maybe what makes us susceptible as human beings. That's a human flaw. The book of Samuel teaches us that God says to Samuel, I don't see people the way that you see people.
Yeah, right.
And so that's what we aspire to. We aspire to, and it's also our trap, is that we continue to see people over and over again the same. And we're looking for heroes and villains to be these very impressive physical beings.
Right.
And when they're not, that's not our way.
The truth of it is to imagine that there's a deep weakness in this man.
Right.
And because he's ruled by his fear. And that's the initiation of the story, right? That's the initiation. That's the impetus, the motive for the story coming forward.
So I'll end on this anecdote, and that is, I saw The Magnificent Seven, and first of all, The Magnificent Seven is a great movie, and the remake of Magnificent Seven is a great movie, and Denzel in that role was fantastic also. But back to the Yul Brynner version, Yul Brynner, when he took his hat off in Magnificent Seven, and he was completely bald, made me think, how did they affix that ponytail to his head in the Ten Commandments? When I watched the movie and I'm fascinated by that. Is it always in the same spot? They must have super glued it on. That's not his hair. So I just as a filmmaker, if I could go back into filmmaker heaven and aspire to one day talk to Cecil B. DeMille, people would ask him questions about these great camera movements, these scenes, these epic masterpieces.
Right.
I would get to the front of the line and I would ask him, how did you get Yul Brynner's ponytail fixed in the Ten Commandments?
And the next piece of it, I don't want to go back to Sirius so quickly because that was such a great story, but the voice, that powerful voice with a slightly British accent. Right. Let it be written, let it be done.
Yes.
There's something. And again, I when I read the story, I don't hear that kind of evil. I hear maybe not Danny DeVito because you said that's too comic, but I see a man who is so uncomfortable, who is so fearful, who is so insecure in his being in the world, that he looks upon this people and immediately projects that hatred upon them, which is ultimately what hate is. It's a projection of what you hate in yourself. He hates them because he sees them as the problem of his people instead of seeing it in himself. He's going to project it on them, and that's going to be the impetus for the story.
Well, I'd like to end this episode by asking our listeners if you have a better casting choice for Pharaoh. That's apparently not Yul Brynner and not Danny DeVito. I also rejected Paul Giamatti. Please email us and let us know who you would cast as Pharaoh. We're probably going to do the same thing for Moses in a few weeks. I can't imagine a different Moses than Charlton Heston.
Well, we'll get. I have some suggestions.
All right, we have some suggestions already, but we'll talk about it in the coming weeks. Send us your thoughts. We look forward to hearing from you. We're awfully glad that you decided to spend some time with us today, and have a wonderful, wonderful week. We'll see you next time.
Let it be written, let it be done.